Carlos Castaneda's A Separate Reality, Part 2, The Task of Seeing, Chapter 12. Working on my notes, I had come across various questions. Is the green fog, like the Guardian, something that one has to overcome in order to see? I asked Don Juan as we sat down under his ramada on August 8, 1969. Yes, one must overcome everything, he said. How can I overcome the green fog? The same way you should have overcome the Guardian, by letting it turn into nothing. What should I do? Nothing. For you, the green fog is something much easier than the Guardian. The spirit of the waterhole likes you. While it certainly was not your temperament to deal with the Guardian, you never really saw the Guardian. Maybe that was because I didn't like it. What if I were meeting the Guardian? What if I were to meet a Guardian I liked? There must be some people who would regard the Guardian I saw as being beautiful. Would they overcome it because they liked it? No, you still don't understand. It doesn't matter whether you like or dislike the Guardian. As long as you have a feeling toward it, the Guardian will remain the same monstrous, beautiful, or whatever. If you have no feeling toward it, on the other hand, the Guardian will become nothing and will still be there in front of you. The idea that something as colossal as the Guardian could become nothing and still be in front of my eyes made absolutely no sense. I felt it was one of the illogical premises of Don Juan's knowledge. However, I also felt that if he wanted to, he could explain it to me. I insisted on asking him what he meant by that. You thought the Guardian was something you knew. That's what I mean. But I didn't think it was something I knew. You thought it was ugly. Its size was awesome. It was a monster. You know what all those things are. So the Guardian was always something you knew. And as long as it was something you knew, you did not see it. I have told you already, the Guardian had to become nothing, and yet it had to stand in front of you. It had to be there, and it had, at the same time, to be nothing. How can that be, Don Juan? What you say is absurd. It is, but that is seeing. There is no way to talk about it. Seeing, as I said before, is learned by seeing. Apparently you have no problems with water. You nearly saw it the other day. Water is your hinge. All you need now is to perfect your technique of seeing. You have a powerful helper in the spirit of the waterhole. That's another burning question I have, Don Juan. You may have all the burning questions you want, but we cannot talk about the spirit of the waterhole in this vicinity. In fact, it is better not to think about it at all. Not at all. Otherwise, the spirit will trap you, and if that happens, there is nothing a living man can do to help you. So keep your mouth shut and keep your thoughts on something else. Around 10 o'clock the next morning, Don Juan took his pipe out of his sheath, filled it with smoking mixture, then handed it to me and told me to carry it to the bank of the stream. Holding the pipe with both hands, I managed to unbutton my shirt and put the pipe inside and hold it tight. Don Juan carried 2 straw mats and a small tray with coals. It was a warm day. We sat on the mats in the shade of a small grove of brea trees at the edge of the water. Don Juan placed the charcoal inside the pipe and told me to smoke. I did not have any apprehension or any feeling of elation. I remembered that during my second attempt to see the Guardian, after Don Juan had explained its nature, I had had a unique sensation of wonder and awe. This time, however, although Don Juan had made me cognizant of the possibility of actually seeing the water, I was not involved emotionally. I was only curious. Don Juan made me smoke twice the amount I had smoked during the previous attempts. At a given moment, he leaned over and whispered in my right ear that he was going to teach me how to use the water in order to move. I felt his face very close, as if he had put his mouth next to my ear. He told me not to gaze into the water, but to focus my eyes on the surface and keep them fixed until the water turned into a green fog. He repeated over and over that I had to put all my attention on the fog until I could not detect anything else. Look at the water in front of you, I heard him saying, but don't let its sound carry you anywhere. If you let the sound of the water carry you, I may never be able to find you and bring you back. Now get into the green fog and listen to my voice. I heard and understood him with extraordinary clarity. I began looking at the water fixedly and had a very peculiar sensation of physical pleasure, an itch, an undefined happiness. I stared for a long time and did not detect the green fog. I felt that my eyes were getting out of focus, and I had to struggle to keep looking at the water. Finally, I could not control my eyes any longer, and I must have closed them, or blinked, or perhaps I just lost my capacity to focus. At any rate, at that very moment, the water became fixed. It ceased to move. It seemed to be a painting. The ripples were immobile. Then the water began to fizzle. It was as if it had carbonated particles that exploded at once. For an instant, I saw the fizzling as a slow expansion of green matter. It was a silent explosion. The water burst in a brilliant green mist, which expanded until it had enveloped me. I remained suspended in it until a very sharp, sustained shrill noise shook everything. The fog seemed to congeal into the usual features of the water surface. The shrill noise was Don Juan yelling, "Hey!" close to my ear. He told me to pay attention to his voice and go back into the fog and wait there until he called me. I said okay in English and heard the crackling noise of his laughter. "Please, don't talk," he said. "Don't give me any more okays." I could hear him very well. The sound of his voice was melodious and above all friendly. I knew that without thinking. It was a conviction that struck me and then passed. Don Juan's voice ordered me to focus all my attention on the fog, but not abandon myself to it. He said repeatedly that a warrior did not abandon himself to anything, not even to his death. I became immersed in the mist again and noticed that it was not fog at all, or at least it was not what I conceived fog to be like. The fog-like phenomenon was composed of tiny bubbles, round objects that came into my field of vision and moved out of it with a floating quality. I watched their movement for a while. Then a loud, distant noise jolted my attention, and I lost my capacity to focus and could no longer perceive the tiny bubbles. All I was aware of then was a green, amorphous, fog-like glow. I heard the loud noise again, and the jolt it gave me dispelled the fog at once, and I found myself looking at the water of the irrigation ditch. Then I heard it again, much closer. It was Don Juan's voice. He was telling me to pay attention to him, because his voice was my only guide. He ordered me to look at the bank of the stream and at the vegetation directly in front of me. I saw some reeds and a space which was clear of reeds. It was a small cove on the bank, a place where Don Juan steps across to plunge his bucket and fill it with water. After a few moments, Don Juan ordered me to return to the fog and asked me again to pay attention to his voice. Because he was going to guide me so I could learn how to move, he said that once I saw the bubbles, I should board one of them and let it carry me. I obeyed him and was at once surrounded by the green mist, and then I saw the tiny bubbles. I heard Don Juan's voice again as a very strange and frightening rumble. Immediately upon hearing it, I began to lose my capacity to perceive the bubbles. "Mount one of those bubbles," I heard him say. I struggled to maintain my perception, of the green bubbles and still hear his voice. I did not know how long I thought to do that, when suddenly I was aware that I could listen to him and still keep sight of the bubbles, which kept on passing through, floating slowly out of my field of perception. Don Juan's voice kept on urging me to follow one of them and mount it. I wondered how I was supposed to do that, and automatically I voiced the word how. I felt that the word was very deep inside me, and as it came out, it carried me to the surface. The word was like a buoy that emerged out of my depth. I heard myself saying how, and I sounded like a dog howling. Don Juan howled back, also like a dog, and then he made some coyote sounds and laughed. I thought it was very funny, and I actually laughed. Don Juan told me very calmly to let myself become affixed to a bubble by following it. Go back again, he said. Go into the fog, into the fog. I went back and noticed that the movement of the bubbles had slowed down. They had become as large as basketballs. In fact, they were so large and slow that I could examine any one of them in great detail. They were not really bubbles, not like a soap bubble, nor like a balloon, nor any spherical container. They were not containers, yet they were contained. Nor were they round, although when I first perceived them, I could have sworn they were round, and the image that came to my mind was bubbles. I viewed them as if I were looking through a window. That is, the frame of a window did not allow me to follow them, but only permitted me to view them coming into and going out of my field of perception. When I ceased to view them as bubbles, however, I was capable of following them. In the act of following them, I became affixed to one of them, and I floated with it. I truly felt I was moving. In fact, I was the bubble, or that thing which resembled the bubble. Then I heard the shrill sound of Don Juan's voice. It jolted me, and I lost my feeling of being it. The sound was extremely frightening. It was a remote voice, very metallic, as if he were talking through a loudspeaker. I made out some of the words. Look at the banks, he said. I saw a very large body of water. The water was rushing. I could hear the noise it made. Look at the banks, Don Juan ordered me again. I saw a concrete wall. The sound of the water became terribly loud. The sound engulfed me. Then it ceased instantaneously, as if it had been cut off. I had the sensation of blackness, of sleep. I became aware that I was immersed in the irrigation ditch. Don Juan was splashing water on my face as he hummed. Then he submerged me in the ditch. He pulled my head up over the surface and let me rest on the bank as he held me by the back of my shirt collar. I had a most pleasant sensation in my arms and legs. I stretched them. My eyes were tired and they itched. I lifted my right hand to rub them. It was a difficult movement. My arm seemed to be heavy. I could hardly lift it out of the water. But when I did, my arm came out covered with a most astonishing mass of green mist. I held my arm in front of my eyes. I could see its contour as a darker mass of green, surrounded by a most intense greenish glow. I got to my feet in a hurry and stood in the middle of the stream and looked at my body. My chest, arms, and legs were green, deep green. The hue was so intense that it gave me the feeling of a viscous substance. I looked like a figurine Don Juan had made for me years before, out of a datura root. Don Juan told me to come out. I noticed an urgency in his voice. I am green, I said. Cut it out, he said imperatively. You have no time to get out of there. The water is about to trap you. Get out of it. Out, out. I panicked and jumped out. This time, you must tell me everything that took place, he said matter-of-factly, as soon as we sat facing each other inside his room. He was not interested in the sequence of my experience. He wanted to know only what I had encountered when he told me to look at the bank. He was interested in the details. I described the wall I had seen. Was the wall to your left or to your right, he asked. I told him that the wall had really been in front of me, but he insisted that it had to be either to my left or to my right. When you first saw it, where was it? Close your eyes and don't open them until you have remembered. He stood up and turned my body while I had my eyes closed until he had me facing east, the same direction I had faced when I was sitting in front of the stream. He asked me in which direction I had moved. I said I had moved onward, ahead, in front of me. He insisted that I should remember and concentrate on the time when I was still viewing the water as bubbles. Which way did they flow, he asked. Don Juan urged me to recall, and finally I had to admit that the bubbles seemed to be moving to my right, yet I was not as absolutely sure as I wanted to be. Under his probing, I began to realize that I was incapable of classifying my perception. The bubbles had moved to my right when I first viewed them, but when they became larger, they flowed everywhere. Some of them seemed to be coming directly at me. Others seemed to go in every possible direction. There were bubbles moving above me and below me. In fact, they were all around me. I recollected hearing their fizzing. Thus, I must have perceived them with my ears as well as with my eyes. When the bubbles became so large that I was able to mount one of them, I saw them rubbing each other like balloons. My excitement increased as I recollected the details of my perception. Don Juan, however, was completely uninterested. I told him that I had seen the bubbles fizzing. It was not a purely auditory or purely visual effect, but something undifferentiated, yet crystal clear. The bubbles rasped against each other. I did not see or hear their movement. I felt it. I was part of the sound and the motion. As I recounted my experience, I became deeply moved. I held his arm and shook it in an outburst of great agitation. I had realized that the bubbles had no outer limit. Nonetheless, they were contained, and their edges changed shape and were uneven and jagged. The bubbles merged and separated with great speed, yet their movement was not dazzling. Their movement was fast and at the same time slow. Another thing I remembered as I recounted my experience was the quality of color that the bubbles seemed to possess. They were transparent and very bright and seemed almost green, although it was not a hue I was accustomed to perceiving. You are stalling, Don Juan said. Those things are not important. You're dwelling on the wrong items. The direction is the only important issue. I could only remember that I had moved without any point of reference, but Don Juan concluded that since the bubbles had flowed consistently to my right, south at the beginning, the south was the direction with which I had to be concerned. He again urged me imperatively to recollect whether the wall was to my right or my left. I strained to remember. When Don Juan called me and I surfaced, so to speak, I think I had the wall to my left. I was very close to it and was able to distinguish the grooves and protuberances of the wooden armature or mold into which the concrete had been poured. Very thin strips of wood had been used, and the pattern they had created was compact. The wall was very high. One end of it was visible to me, and I noticed that it did not have a corner, but curved around. He sat in silence for a moment, as if he were thinking how to decipher the meaning of my experience. He finally said that I had not accomplished a great deal, that I had fallen short of what he expected me to do. What was I supposed to do? He did not answer, but made a puckering gesture with his lips. "You did very well," he said. "Today you learned that a brew hoe uses the water to move." But did I see? He looked at me with a curious expression. He rolled his eyes and said that I had to go into the green mist a good many times until I could answer that question myself. He changed the direction of our conversation in a subtle way, saying I had not really learned how to move using the water, but I had learned that a brew hoe could do that, and he had deliberately told me to look at the bank of the stream so I could check my movement. "You move very fast," he said, "as fast as a man who knows how to perform this technique. I had a hard time keeping up with you." I begged him to explain what had happened to me from the beginning. He laughed, shaking his head slowly, as though in disbelief. "You always insist on knowing things from the beginning," he said, but there's no beginning. The beginning is only in your thought." "I think the beginning was when I sat on the bank and smoked," I said. "But before you smoked, I had to figure out what to do with you," he said. "I would have to tell you what I did, and I can't do that because it would take me to still another point. So perhaps things would be clearer to you if you didn't think about beginnings." "Then tell me what happened after I sat on the bank and smoked." "I think you have told me that already," he said, laughing. "Was anything I did of any importance, Don Juan?" He shrugged his shoulders. You followed my direction very well and had no problem getting in and out of the fog. Then you listened to my voice and returned to the surface every time I called you. That was the exercise. The rest was very easy. You simply let the fog carry you. You behaved as though you knew what to do. When you were very far away, I called you again and made you look at the bank so you know how far you had gone. Then I pulled you back. You mean, Don Juan, that I really traveled in the water?" "You did, and very far, too." "How far?" "You wouldn't believe it. I tried to coax him into telling me, but he dropped the subject and said that he had to leave for a while, and I insisted that he should at least give me a hint." "I don't like to be kept in the dark," I said. "You keep yourself in the dark," he said. "Think about the wall you saw. Sit down here on your mat and remember every detail of it. Then perhaps you yourself may discover how far you went. All I know now is that you traveled very far. I know that because I had a terrible time pulling you back. If I had not been around, you might have wandered off and never returned. In which case, all that would be left of you now would be your dead body on the side of the stream. Or perhaps you might have returned by yourself. With you, I am not sure. So judging by the effort it took me to bring you back, I'd say you were clearly in." He made a long pause, then stared at me in a friendly way. I would go as far as the mountains of central Mexico," he said. "I don't know how far you would go, perhaps as far as Los Angeles, or perhaps even as far as Brazil." Don Juan returned the next day in the afternoon. In the meantime, I had written down everything. Everything I could recollect about my perception. While I wrote, it occurred to me to follow the banks up and down the stream in each direction and corroborate whether I had actually seen a feature on either side that might be elicited in me. I'm pretty sure about this word. That might have elicited in me the image of a wall. I conjured that Don Juan might have made me walk in a state of stupor, and then might have made me focus my attention on some wall on the way. In the hours that elapsed between the time I first detected the fog and the time I got out of the ditch and went back to his house, I calculated that if he had made me walk, we would have walked at the most 2.5 miles. So I followed the banks of the stream about 3 miles in each direction, carefully observing each feature which might have been pertinent to my vision of the wall. The stream was, as far as I could tell, a plain canal used for irrigation. It was 4 or 5 feet wide throughout. Its length I could not find. Its length and I could not find any visible features in it that would have reminded me or forced the image of a concrete wall. It was 4 or 5 feet wide throughout. Its length, and that just doesn't make sense. And its length and I could not find any visible features in it that would have reminded me or forced me the image of a concrete wall. When Don Juan arrived at his house in the late afternoon, I accosted him and insisted on reading my account to him. He refused to listen and made me sit down. He sat facing me. He was not smiling. He seemed to be thinking, judging by the penetrating look of his eyes, which were fixed from above the horizon. "I think you must be aware by now," he said in a tone that was suddenly very severe, "that everything is mortally dangerous. The water is as deadly as the guardian. If you don't watch out, the water will trap you. It nearly did that yesterday. But in order to be trapped, a man has to be willing. There's your trouble. You're willing to abandon yourself." I did not know what he was talking about. His attack on me had been so sudden that I was disorientated. I feebly asked him to explain himself. He reluctantly mentioned that he had gone to the water canyon and had seen the spirit of the waterhole and had the profound conviction I had flubbed my chance to see the water. "How?" I asked, truly baffled. "The spirit is a force," he said, "and as much as it responds only to strength, you cannot indulge in its presence." "When did I indulge?" "Yesterday, when you became green in the water." "I did not indulge. I thought it was a very important moment. Important moment. I told you what was happening to me." "Who are you to think or decide what is important? You know nothing about the forces you're trapping. The spirit of the waterhole exists out there and could have helped you. In fact, it was helping you until you flubbed it. Now I don't know what will be the outcome of your doings. You have succumbed to the force of the waterhole spirit, and now it can take you any time." Was it wrong to look at myself turning green? You abandoned yourself. You willed to abandon yourself. That was wrong. I have told you this already, and I will repeat it again. You can survive in the world of a brujo only if you are a warrior. A warrior treats everything with respect and does not trample on anything unless he has to. You did not treat the water with respect yesterday. Usually you behave very well. However, yesterday you abandoned yourself to your death like a goddamn fool. A warrior does not abandon himself to anything, not even to his death. A warrior is not a willing partner. A warrior is not available. And if he involves himself with something, you can be sure that he is aware of what he is doing. I did not know what to say. Don Juan was almost angry. That disturbed me. Don Juan had rarely behaved in such a way to me. I told him that I truly had no idea I was doing something wrong. After some minutes of tense silence, he took off his hat and smiled and told me that I had gained control over that I had to gain control over my indulging self. He stressed that I had to avoid water and keep from touching the surface of my body for 3 or 4 months. "I don't think I could go without taking a shower," I said. Don Juan laughed until tears rolled down his cheeks. "You can't go without a shower. At times, you're so weak I think you're putting me on. But it is not a joke. At times you really have no control, and the forces of your life take you freely." I raised the point that it was humanly impossible to be controlled at all times. He maintained that for a warrior, there was nothing out of control. I brought up the idea of accidents and said that what happened to me at the water canal could certainly be classed as an accident, since I neither meant nor was I aware of my improper behavior. I talked about different people who had misfortunes that could be explained as accidents. I talked especially about Lucas, a very fine old Yaqui man who had suffered a serious injury when the truck he was driving overturned. It seems to me it is impossible to avoid accidents, I said. No man can control everything around him. True, Don Juan said cuttingly, but not everything is an unavoidable accident. Lucas did not live like a warrior. If he did, he'd know that he is waiting and what he is waiting for. And he wouldn't have driven that truck while he was drunk. He crashed against the rock side of the road because he was drunk and mangled his body for nothing. Life for a warrior is an exercise in strategy, Don Juan went on. But you want to find the meaning of life. A warrior doesn't care about meanings. If Lucas lived like a warrior, and he had a chance to, as we all have a chance to, he would have set his life strategically. Thus, if he couldn't avoid an accident that crushed his ribs, he could have found the means to offset that handicap, or avoid its consequences, or battle against them. If Lucas were a warrior, he wouldn't be sitting in his dingy little house dying of starvation. He would be battling to the end. I posed an alternative to Don Juan, using him as an example, and asked him what would be the outcome if he himself were to be involved in an accident that severed his legs. If I cannot help it and lose my legs, he said, I won't be able to be a man anymore, so I will join that which is waiting for me out there. He made a sweeping gesture with his hand to point all around him. I argued that he had misunderstood me. I had meant to point out that it was impossible for any single individual to foresee all the variables involved in his day-to-day actions. All I can say to you, Don Juan said, is that a warrior is never available. Never is he standing on the road waiting to be clobbered. Thus, he cuts to a minimum his chances of the unforeseen. What you call accidents are most of the time very easy to avoid, except for fools who are living helter-skelter. It is not possible to live strategically all the time, I said. Imagine that someone is waiting for you with a powerful rifle, with a telescope sight. He could spot you accurately 500 yards away. What would you do? Don Juan looked at me with an air of disbelief and then broke into laughter. What would you do? I urged him. If someone is waiting for me with a rifle, with a telescopic sight, he said, obviously mocking me. If someone is hiding out of sight waiting for you, you wouldn't have a chance. You can't stop a bullet. No, I can't, but I still don't understand your point. My point is that all your strategy can not be of any help in a situation like that. Oh, but it can. If someone is waiting for me with a powerful rifle with a telescopic sight, I simply will not come around. End of chapter.